Well, we have been discussing in class the different types of inheritance with dominant and recessive, very simple Punnett square inheritance. But not all things follow the very simple Punnett square and have a dominant recessive pattern. There are more complex forms of inheritance. So we're going to be looking at the more complex inheritance patterns, which you can find in section 11.2 of your book, which begins on page 302. So not all of the traits that people have follow the dominant recessive pattern. So in this section we are going to look at the various complex inheritance patterns, look at sex-linked inheritance, and we're also going to take a moment to discuss how the environment can influence the phenotype of something. So not just how genetics influence things, but how is it possible that sometimes the environment influences things. So we're going to begin by talking about something called incomplete dominance. In incomplete dominance, it is a situation where neither trait is expressed and a whole new trait is expressed. So the heterozygous phenotype is kind of an in-between phenotype because not one trait dominates over the other, so therefore you get a whole new trait. So if you take a look here at the picture, which is also found on page 302 in your book, you will see you take a red flower and a white flower and you cross them, and the heterozygous condition, which is big R, little r, results in a pink flower. Because the red flower does not completely dominate over the white flower, so therefore you end up with a pink flower. So this is what we call incomplete dominance, where one gene does not completely dominate over the other, and the heterozygous condition will result in a whole new phenotype. That is one form of complex inheritance. Another is codominance. And in this case, when you have the heterozygous condition, both traits get expressed. One place we see this is with sickle cell disease. In sickle cell disease, you have red blood cells that are shaped like a sickle, okay, or a C-shaped, which you can see in your book on page 303. So sickle cell disease results in the C-shaped or sickle-shaped red blood cell, and this occurs in a heterozygous condition. So if you have the heterozygous gene combination, then you have both normal red blood cells and sickle cell blood cells. So it's not a situation where the normal blood cell will dominate over the sickle cell. If you are a carrier for the sickle cell disease, you will have the sickle cell red blood cell and the normal red blood cell. Typically, though, these people don't show signs of the disease because they have enough normal red blood cells to make their blood work the way it's supposed to, and they can lead a totally normal life. But they still have both the red blood cells, so therefore both traits are expressed. So as you can see in this example on the screen, you have two parents that are carriers for sickle cell, which means, since that's the heterozygous condition, that they have normal and carrier red blood cells, normal and sickle-shaped red blood cells. In their 4 children, they will have 1 that's normal. You will have 2 that are carriers or heterozygous, so that means that they have both normal red blood cells and sickle-shaped, and then you have 1 that actually has sickle cell disease where all the red blood cells are sickle-shaped. So in this situation, the heterozygous condition means that both traits are expressed. One didn't dominate over the other. Both of them got expressed. So if they are a carrier for sickle cell disease, they have both the sickle cell red blood and the normal red blood. But they can typically lead normal lives because they have enough normal red blood cells. So this is one example of codominance. Okay. And this would be the situation with the sickle cell. The red blood cells are sickle-shaped, and if you are heterozygous for that, if you're a carrier, then you actually have both the normal red blood cell and the sickle cell. But typically you have enough normal red blood cells with the sickle cell that you lead a normal life. Okay. Other examples of codominance things would be like if you breed, say, a black chicken with a white chicken, and you get a chicken with black and white feathers. Okay. That would be codominance. Both the traits are expressed. If you have a red cow and a white cow and you breed them and they have a mix of red and white hair, that is an example of codominance. So in codominance, both the traits are expressed in the heterozygous condition. Incomplete dominance, if you go back, incomplete dominance will give you a whole new trait, like the red and white flowers make pink. In codominance, both the traits get expressed. So those are two examples of more complex inheritance. Now another form of complex inheritance is through multiple alleles, like your blood type. So typically we've talked about where there are two alleles controlling a trait. But sometimes there are multiple alleles that control a trait. So, for instance, in blood type, there are 3 alleles that control your blood type. So you have the A, B, and O allele that control blood type. So there's 3 forms of that. So when you have either A, B, or the O, okay, which is actually, O is just the absence of A or B that control your blood. So instead of blood type being controlled by 2 alleles, like all the traits we've been talking about, it's actually controlled by 3 alleles, which is then what allows you to have 4 different blood types, A, B, B, or O. And you will notice here that there are no lowercase letters. These are all indicated by uppercase letters. And the heterozygous condition is if you have an A and a B, or an A and an O, or a B and an O, those are the heterozygous conditions. And so that's how you would do the Punnett squares for multiple alleles. Just another form of complex inheritance. Okay. Coat color in rabbit is another example of this, where there are 4 alleles that code for rabbit fur color. So it's not always 2 alleles that code for something. In the case of blood type, there are 3 alleles. In the case of fur color on rabbits, there's 4 alleles, and that's on page 304 in your book. And you'll see here all the different types of coat color of rabbits. Since there are 4 alleles that control the coat color in rabbits, there are multiple different types of phenotypes for rabbit color, since it's controlled by 4 alleles. Another type of complex inheritance is through things that are linked to the X and Y chromosomes. So if you look here, females carry 2 X chromosomes, and a male carries an X and a Y chromosome. So that's how sex determination is done. And sex-linked traits are genes located on the X chromosome. Well, why are we concerned with genes on the X chromosome? Well, in the case of girls, females, they have 2 X chromosomes. So if they have a recessive trait on the X chromosome, the other could give them the dominant trait. So they have a dominant on one X chromosome and a recessive on the other. They have the heterozygous condition. So instead of being or having a certain condition, most of the time they're just carriers for the condition because they have two X chromosomes. But with males, since they only have one X chromosome, whatever gene is on the X chromosome gets expressed. There's no other X chromosome to dominate over it because males only have one X chromosome. So, if you look at the situation with color blindness, okay, color blindness is a trait located on the X chromosome. If you look at a girl, the daughter who's a carrier, she has dominant versus recessive traits. So she has a capital C and a lowercase c. So therefore, she's a carrier, but she has one dominant, one recessive trait. If you look at the male for X versus Y, he has the recessive trait on his X chromosome, but he doesn't have a second X chromosome to dominate over it, so he will be colorblind. So most often, the females are carriers of the traits that then are expressed in the males. So if the mothers are carriers, they can pass it on to their sons. So if you look here, the mother was a carrier, and she passed the color blindness on to her son. And that's because the males only get one X chromosome. And if you think to the movie Lorenzo's Oil, you will note that it mentioned even in that movie how the mother gave the disease to her son, to Lorenzo. She gave ALD to him because it's a sex-linked trait. And so then it was passed on to her son because he only gets one X chromosome. And if he gets the X, recessive X from his mother, then he will have the condition, like color blindness, or hemophilia is another disease that's associated with that, where your blood will not clot. So sex-linked diseases are another type of complex inheritance, where the mothers are the carriers and they pass on that one X chromosome to their son, who ends up having the condition. Another type is polygenic inheritance. With polygenic inheritance, there are multiple genes that control a certain condition. Like skin color in humans is polygenic. Eye color, height are all polygenic, where there are multiple alleles that control your skin color, hair color, eye color, are all controlled by multiple genes. And that's called polygenic. Poly means many, and then genes. Many genes controlling a trait. So you have multiple genes controlling these things. Environmental influences are always there, such as diet and exercise, sunlight and water, temperature can have an effect on all of these different types of traits. Okay. You think about plants. Many times the amount of nutrients in the soil can affect the flower color. So even though it's got the genetics to be a certain color, deficiency of certain nutrients and things can alter the color of flowers. If you look on page 309, the Siamese cat, the cat color of their fur can often be inhibited or changed by temperature of the cat. So there are environmental influences that can affect an organism's phenotype. Twin studies are very common. If you think about twins, they are genetically the same. Okay. So if you look at twins and knowing that they're genetically the same, but yet they might be expressing some different phenotypes, you can see what phenotypes are more influenced by environment. So traits that are expressed differently in identical twins are largely influenced by the environment. Since twins are genetically identical, they should have all the exact same phenotype, diseases, conditions. They should have all of those same things, but many times they don't because of environmental influences. So by doing twin studies, you can study a set of twins and see what traits are more influenced by environment than others. And it talks about this on page 310 in your book. So sometimes environment does have an effect, not just genetics. And we use twin studies to determine that. So these are the different types of complex inheritance, which are covered in section 11.2 of your book. We have incomplete dominance, codominance, multiple alleles that control things, sex-linked traits, polygenic inheritance, all of which can then be slightly influenced by environment.